Alexis Sharkey seemed like she had the perfect life. She posted beautiful photos, went on luxury trips, and had thousands of followers on social media. She even had a marriage that almost seemed too good to be true. But behind those posts and poetic captions, something terrifying was happening that almost nobody could see. Before Alexis could make a move, she suddenly disappeared. There were no calls, texts, and no social media activity at all. For most people, that might not be unusual, but for her, silence like that made no sense. The people closest to her knew immediately that something was very wrong, and less than 24 hours later, a city worker driving through Houston spotted something in the bushes off the side of the road. At first, he thought it was a mannequin, but it wasn't. What investigators discovered next only deepened the mystery because despite how her body was found, there were almost no obvious signs of what actually happened to her. There was a growing list of disturbing questions, and a husband that story kept changing. But the most unfortunate twist in this entire case came almost a year later. Just when detectives were finally preparing to make an arrest, everything took a shocking turn that changed the entire investigation forever. Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell before you go. All right, my friends, let's get into today's case. Alexis Lee Robinault was born on January 4th, 1994 in Warren, Pennsylvania to her parents Mike and Stacy. She grew up in Youngsville, which is a small, tight-knit community of only about 1,900 people in the northwest corner of the state. Alexis was the oldest of three daughters, and she was known to be beautiful, present, warm, and just someone who made people feel seen whenever she was around. Her mom, Stacy, said that Alexis was very health conscious from a very young age. She cared about what she put in and on her body, and that passion would become the foundation of her entire career later on. She was also a total social butterfly. She lit up a room without even trying, and Alexis had a quick sense of humor and smile that radiated, so her joy was infectious to anyone that she was around. You couldn't help but be happy if you were around her. After graduating from Youngsville High School in 2012, she enrolled at the University of Pittsburgh at Bradford. Alexis spent 4 years there. Then she graduated in 2016 with a bachelor's degree in science, majoring in biology, with minors in both nutrition and psychology. Biology gave her the scientific foundation, and nutrition gave her the practical application of that science to human health. After graduation, Alexis dreamt of going to medical school, and she was preparing to actually take the MCAT. She planned to take a gap year first, which is something that a lot of pre-med students do, just to decompress from the craziness of college, maybe build some job experience, and recharge before the next chapter. But that gap year ended up changing everything for her. In 2018, she ended up in West Texas in a town called Odessa, working at a restaurant called Twin Peaks. This is where she met a man named Thomas Sharkey. He was one of her regular customers, and the two of them hit it off immediately. The sparks were natural between this couple, and they quickly started seeing each other and made it official. The two of them got married on December 20th, 2019, and it was around this same time that she was introduced to the world of social media entrepreneurship, and Alexis leaned into that with everything that she had. She was a natural. She became a brand partner for a multi-level marketing company that sells hair care, skincare, and wellness products, and Alexis built her platform around traveling, wellness, and beauty. By the time that she and Tom relocated to Houston in January of 2020, she had somewhere between 20 to 21,000 Instagram followers, so she had worked very hard and was finally starting to see some of the benefits from it. Her sister Tony said to the media, though, that Alexis was educated. She had big goals and dreams, so she was so much more than an influencer. I wanted to mention that here because Alexis had worked hard prior to social media too, and her family doesn't want that hard work to go unnoticed. Thomas Sharkey, or Tom to everyone that knew him, grew up in Fort Myers, Florida, and he was more than 20 years older than Alexis. He had at least one daughter from a previous relationship, and she still lived in Fort Myers while he was living in Texas. On social media, though, Alexis and Tom seemed to be this fit, adventurous couple. He posted about her with adoration and affection, but as we know, not everything is always how it seems on the outside. Friends said that things were off pretty quickly in their relationship, even though Alexis kept quiet about a lot of their issues. But one night in Marfa, Texas, in October 2020, everything came to light. Alexis went on a trip to Marfa with a group of her close friends. Marfa is a small, artsy desert town in West Texas, and she was really looking forward to breaking away for this trip. While she was there, she told her friends that she was really afraid of her husband and said that she was actually scared for her life. She talked about having serious problems at home and that things had taken an incredibly volatile turn. She'd been holding on to this for a long time, but it finally came out that their marriage was not the way that they made it seem online. Alexis wasn't safe because their arguments had now become physical, and she'd finally built up the courage to talk to her friends about it. Around that same time, she made the decision that she was done. She was going to file for divorce, and she made that choice only 1 month before today's story takes place. Now, no paperwork had been formally filed yet, but the decision had been made that Alexis was going to leave Tom. The time when a victim decides to leave a relationship like this is statistically the most dangerous time in their life. The aggressor feels like their control is slipping, and in many cases, that loss of control can become lethal. On November 22nd, 2020, Alexis posted on Instagram. The picture was from a recent trip to Tulum, Mexico, and the caption was something about wanting to move there permanently just because of how beautiful it was there. This was a very typical post for her based on the content that she usually put out to her followers. But that was the last thing that she would ever post. Alexis' social media went completely silent on November 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th. And I need you to understand what that silence means for someone like Alexis. November 27th that year was Black Friday. For an online entrepreneur that made their living on sales, Black Friday is not a day off. That is one of the highest traffic sales days of the entire year. So it's a day where someone in her line of work posts, promotes, engages, and drives sales for her community. One of her friends said that Black Friday silence was the biggest red flag for her, and this is when her friends actually began to worry. When the person whose livelihood depends on daily social media posts goes completely quiet on the biggest content day of the year, that's not by choice. Something had already happened. On November 25th, Alexis spoke with her mom, Stacy, on the phone, and it seemed like a normal phone call between mom and daughter. Stacy had no idea that this would be her last conversation with her daughter. She had no reason to think that she was in any kind of grave danger, and that is one of the most devastating details of this entire case to me. People that are in unhealthy relationships or violent ones usually are too afraid to tell their loved ones how bad things have actually become at home. And Stacy had her concerns about Tom, but she had no idea at the time how bad things really had been. On the morning of Thanksgiving, Alexis and Tom shared a meal together at their apartment. Alexis didn't want to be there, though. A friend had invited her over to their Thanksgiving dinner, and she accepted because she wanted to be anywhere else but home. She ate with Tom, then left to spend the actual holiday with her friends at a table that she felt safe and welcomed at. The last confirmed time that anyone saw or had contact with Alexis was about 6 p.m. on the evening of November 27th. After that, her phone went completely dark. There were no calls, texts, or social media activity anymore from that point forward. Before Alexis left her friend's Thanksgiving celebration, she'd made plans to spend Saturday, November 28th, with them to watch movies, but she never showed up that next day. She'd still been silent on social media, and remember, she was also silent on Black Friday, but they were just hoping that maybe Alexis would still show up the next day. When she didn't show up on Saturday, they tried calling and texting and got no response. She made these plans with them, so their concern quickly grew, and her friends ended up calling the police and reporting her missing. One more thing I want to point out here, because I think it matters, is that it was not Tom Sharkey that reported his own wife missing. Her friends did. The man who lived with her, who last saw her, did not make the first call to the police. What her friends didn't know at the time was that Alexis had already been found. On the morning of November 28th, a City of Houston employee named John Richardson started his usual morning driving the garbage truck when he saw something strange off the side of the road. He wasn't quite sure what he was looking at, but he second-guessed himself and thought maybe this could be a mannequin. He noticed what appeared to be feet sticking out from the bushes off the side of the road. He got his coworkers' attention, and together, they found Alexis lying naked halfway in a ditch beside the road. She'd been discarded as if her life meant nothing. Richardson immediately called 911, and Houston Police Department arrived quickly on scene. The homicide detectives arrived soon after, and they said that there were no visible signs of an injury on her body. In fact, she looked completely clean. So they had no clue what happened to her at first, and they believed that her body had just simply been left there overnight. Had she gotten drunk and just wandered out there on her own and maybe even died naturally? During that 14-hour window between 6 p.m. on the 27th and 8 a.m. on November 28th, Alexis Sharkey had been killed, stripped of her clothing, and her body was left on the side of the road on the 1000 block of Red Hall Lane in West Houston, Texas. Now, the specific mechanics of how Alexis was killed, like the exact location, sequence of events, and what led up to her final moments, haven't been shared, which you'll understand why a little later on in today's case. The Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences performed the autopsy on Alexis, and they confirmed on January 19th, 2021, that her cause of death was strangulation and the manner of death was homicide. As always, I want to unpack this a little bit before we continue on with what happened next, though. When Alexis's body was found, she was completely nude. Every article of clothing that she'd been wearing was gone and it was never recovered. And remember, her body appeared to be clean, almost washed, which seemed very unusual. Police confirmed that there were no signs that Alexis had walked to that location on her own either. There were no footprints or disturbances in the brush that were consistent with someone moving around there. There was also no blood or signs of a struggle at the scene, so the police knew that this was likely a dump site and that Alexis had been murdered somewhere else. Now, taking off her clothes and washing her body are significant because Alexis's clothes would contain important forensic evidence. We know that the clothes could contain fiber transfers, skin cells, hair, or DNA from physical contact, plus any other trace evidence that could tell us exactly what happened to her. Of course, a killer wouldn't want that, so cleaning her up and getting rid of her clothing destroyed important evidence that they wouldn't want the cops to find. When it comes to the ME finding out that she had died of strangulation despite there being no injuries, I want to talk about that. Strangulation can lead to death in three main ways, and in many cases, more than one of these is happening at the same time. Understanding those differences matters because whichever one played the biggest role can affect what the doctors and investigators see to the naked eye. The first way is by cutting off blood flow to the brain. For anyone that's been here for a while, some of this should sound familiar to you. The carotid arteries are located on both sides of the neck, and they carry oxygen-rich blood up to the brain. If enough pressure is placed on these arteries, blood flow to the brain can slow down dramatically or completely stop. When that happens, a person can lose consciousness quickly, sometimes within just 10 to 15 seconds. The important thing to understand, though, is that the carotid arteries are fairly close to the surface of the neck, so it doesn't take extreme force to compress them. This is actually the most common way that manual strangulation causes unconsciousness and death. Because of that, someone can be strangled even if there are little to no obvious injuries visible on the outside of the neck. Strangulation can also be lethal by crushing or compressing the trachea, also known as the windpipe, which blocks air from moving into and out of the lungs. This prevents the person from getting oxygen because the path has been literally destroyed. This usually takes a lot more pressure, though, and more time to cause unconsciousness compared to cutting off blood flow to the brain. In many cases, both blood flow restriction and airway blockage are happening at the same time. The force that comes from someone crushing a trachea would leave visible marks on the outside of the skin, though. There's also an area in the neck called the carotid sinus, which is located where the carotid arteries actually branch. This area helps to regulate blood pressure and heart rate. If strong enough pressure is applied at that point, it can trigger what's called a vagal reflex. In healthcare, we actually use this reflex as a positive tool, like for patients in a dangerous heart rhythm. Let me know if you've heard of this in the comments. That reflex can cause the heart rate to suddenly slow down. In severe cases, it can actually make the heart stop altogether. This can cause death much faster than other strangulation mechanisms. And here's how this all applies to Alexis's case specifically. The dominant mechanism in most manual strangulation cases is actually vascular occlusion, which is the first type we talked about, and it does not necessarily leave obvious injuries. It requires compression but not crushing, and it's normal to not find any broken bones like the hyoid bone, for instance. So when first responders said that there were no visible wounds at the scene, I need you to understand that this does not mean that the body had no evidence of strangulation. It just means that the injuries weren't apparent in a field setting. The medical examiner found exactly what mattered internally under exam and successfully determined that Alexis Sharkey had in fact been strangled and murdered. As far as timing goes, investigators believe that Alexis's body had been left on the road overnight. They confirmed that she was last known to be alive around 6 p.m. on November 27th and that her body was discovered around 8 on the 28th, which created that 14-hour time window that we talked about. To estimate time of death, the medical examiners rely on several well-known physical changes that happen to the body after the heart stops. After death, the heart stops pumping blood, and then gravity actually causes the blood to settle down into the lower parts of the body, depending on the position that they're in. This creates a dark purplish red color called lividity. Lividity usually starts developing within just an hour or two of dying. In the nursing world, there have been instances where we've kept patients in their bed after passing away so that family from out of town can come say goodbye, and this can be seen fairly quickly. After about 8 to 12 hours, it becomes fixed, meaning that the blood has settled permanently enough that the pattern can no longer change even when the body is moved. This becomes extremely important in cases like Alexis's. If she died inside in one position and then was brought somewhere else later on and left in that ditch, let's say, the lividity pattern could explain that because the pattern would show that the original position that she was in was not how she was found. When the lividity pattern does not match how a victim's found, that is a major clue to forensic pathologists that the body was moved after death. This helps the investigators determine that they're dealing with a dump site and not the actual crime scene, which is even more important to locate so that they can find more evidence. The investigators confirmed that the lividity did not match the way Alexis was found on the side of the road, so this is not where she lost her life. That was an incredibly important finding. Thomas Sharkey was the only person who had the means, motive, and opportunity to have committed this murder, according to the Houston police. So at this point, he was an official person of interest, and here is why. Tom was a grown man in his late 40s, and Alexis was a 26-year-old woman. He had physical access to her because they lived together, and he had a documented history of physical violence in that relationship. Whoever killed Alexis also had access to a private space to handle her body afterwards and a vehicle to transport her to Red Hall Lane. Tom had all of that. The dump site also happened to be about 3 miles from their apartment, and HPD said that that's not a coincidence. Alexis was leaving him, and the investigators confirmed that she'd been moving towards separation, but Tom wanted to reconcile. She did not want to reconcile with him, and this was documented in their messages and what Alexis had also shared with her friends. There may not have been court records showing that they had filed for divorce yet, but HPD said that the evidence was unmistakably clear. And as I mentioned earlier, the period when a victim is leaving an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time. Tom stood to lose everything that he felt he had control over when Alexis said no to working things out. The investigators also knew that Tom was the last person to have been with her. Investigators tested every alternate suspect that he came up with to try to redirect their attention, and the police eliminated every single one of them. Tom Sharkey was the only suspect left. Tom had also had many police interviews, and he had several stories that changed constantly, but the police were able to disprove them all. His overall behavior was a core part of how this case was built, so let's walk through some of that now. On November 28, 2020, Tom went down to the Harris County Medical Examiner's office to identify Alexis Sharkey's remains. On that very same day, he was active on social media and posting about her before anything had been released to the public. He went from asking for help to find her to immediately posting tributes for his late wife. Her own family had barely found out that Alexis was gone, and he was blasting it all over social media. In one post, he wrote, "My world, my everything, I'm so lost right now, my one and only." To online people, this may have read as grief, and grief can look different for everyone, but many felt immediately that this was insincere. Tom had said that Alexis was drinking on the night of the 27th, and he warned her not to drive under the influence, but she decided to do it anyway. Then he said that she possibly climbed over their patio fence, so she left without him knowing, then got into a car and left to go over to her friend's house. He made sure to add that they did not fight that night before she left, by the way. On December 2nd, 2020, Tom gave a phone interview to ABC 13, and he described their marriage as happy. He also said that he was Alexis's emotional support and he was building her up. He insisted that he was cooperating with the investigators at that time, and he ended the interview by saying, I'm sorry, I'm not a jerk, I'm just destroyed." This is the last public statement that he would ever make, probably because he realized that honestly nobody was buying his story. About 2 weeks after Alexis passed away, so around mid December, Tom fled the state. He didn't announce that he was leaving and he didn't tell the investigators where he was even going. He just ran off to Georgia. A man whose wife had just been murdered and whose case was an active homicide investigation just left. If he wasn't guilty, why wouldn't he want to be there to fight for justice for his wife? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments. He also made zero funeral arrangements for Alexis before leaving and didn't communicate any sort of plans to her own family. The medical examiner's office eventually changed the next of kin to Stacy Robinott, her mom, because Tom had not engaged with them at all, which is one of the most glaring red flags in this case. They had nobody to release her remains to because he wouldn't even return the medical examiner's calls. A private viewing and funeral service was held for Alexis in Pennsylvania on December 19th, 2020, and it was kept completely private from Tom. His friend confirmed to the media that he was not invited, that the family actively worked to exclude him, and that they kept this private so that he wouldn't find out about it. They must have had a gut instinct about what really happened, and honestly, can we blame them after he abandoned her remains to the ME and then refused to plan a funeral for her? On January 19th, 2021, so exactly 1 month after her funeral, HPD released the official autopsy findings showing that Alexis had been strangled and the manner of death was homicide. Tom was not named publicly as a suspect just yet, and he had been silent ever since his December interview. He also hadn't made any public statements in response to the autopsy findings. If he were concerned about finding out who killed his wife, I would think he'd be on the phone with the investigators or maybe back in Texas trying to figure this all out. By August of 2021, the investigators arranged for Tom to meet with the detectives to provide his own DNA sample. He wasn't exactly sure why, but he did agree to meeting up with them, and then he didn't show up. Let me ask you this. If you had nothing to hide, and your spouse had just been murdered, and investigators asked you to give a DNA sample to help solve it, why would you not show up? Now I want to bring us back to the press conference where HPD announced that Tom Sharkey was at least a person of interest. After nearly a year of investigating, HPD obtained a murder warrant for Thomas Sharkey from a Harris County judge. The warrant was obtained quietly, specifically because of Tom being a runner, and the investigators were afraid of him fleeing again. They didn't want to tip him off, but the plan was to arrest him in Georgia, then bring him back to Texas to charge him with Alexis's murder in Harris County. On October 5th, 2021, the U.S. Marshals got their warrant and their task force in Houston discovered that Tom was not in Georgia anymore. He was back in Fort Myers, Florida, in his hometown staying with his daughter. In the early morning hours of October 6th, the task force members approached their residence. Tom's daughter and her boyfriend came outside, and the investigators entered the home, but Tom bolted upstairs. Before he could be placed under arrest or even know that he was being charged with his wife's murder, he immediately shot himself in the head. He was dead on scene, and he would never be taken into custody. On October 7th, so the day after Tom's death, HPD held that press conference led by Sergeant Michael Burrow of the Homicide Division. He confirmed to the public that Thomas Sharkey was the only person that the investigators felt had the means, motive, and opportunity to have committed this murder. He also shared that any other suspects were investigated and eliminated, confirmed the history of domestic violence, and the pain that he inflicted on Alexis throughout their relationship. He also addressed the question of whether or not the police should have moved in quicker, but he said that a case built for prosecution has to be built correctly. They couldn't afford to arrest him without evidence and a warrant. Rushing it and getting it wrong meant that a suspect could walk free permanently under double jeopardy. They couldn't risk that. And then he said a line that I keep coming back to. He said, Mr. Sharkey's behavior and conversations with him over time and evolving stories and ability to disprove stories led to this. Eventually, the mountain of evidence just became high enough. No further details about the physical evidence were ever released, so we don't even know what evidence was found in the car or the apartment because that would have come out in trial. The investigation was officially closed, and the case in the eyes of law enforcement was solved. But there's a difference between a case being closed and a case being solved because for Alexis's family, they are not the same thing. Stacy, Alexis's mom, had believed from day one that Tom was responsible. She said this publicly in November 2020 before the autopsy even came out and before any official direction came from the HPD. This was also before Tom ran and took his own life. She said to ABC 13, I I do believe she was murdered. From what I've been able to gather, as well as a mother's gut, I've learned from a very young age to trust my gut. It's not let me down. She was right, and HPD eventually confirmed that she was. But being told that you were right without a trial, a verdict, or without ever sitting in a courtroom and watching the system provide the justice that she deserved for her daughter is a different kind of grief. Validation without justice is not real justice. I want to close this section by talking about something that sits with me every time I cover a case like this one, because Alexis's story isn't only about what Tom Sharkey did, it's also about the dangers of what can happen in relationships like this. Alexis was in a dangerous marriage. HPD confirmed it, and she even shared with multiple close friends by October how bad things had gotten, and yet she never filed a police report and she never tried to get a protective order against him. I want to clarify that this is not a criticism of Alexis. I'm bringing this up because this is the reality of intimate partner violence. The research is consistent that the majority of victims never get the courage to report what's been happening to law enforcement, and in many cases, it's too late by the time they do. The barriers are real, and so is the fear of retaliation. Alexis was taking baby steps and doing what a victim should do. She was opening up to people that she trusted, and she was building her support system to get away. She'd already made the decision to leave, and she was murdered before she could break free from him. Please know that if you can relate to any of this, there is help and resources out there. I'll be sure to add some information into the description box down below. Because Tom is no longer alive, no one has ever been criminally convicted of anything related to Alexis Sharkey's death. The case is closed, and the only suspect is dead in this homicide case, so the full truth of what happened will never be known. Alexis had accomplished so much in her short 26 years of life. She went to college and earned her degree, she was building something meaningful, and she had people around her who loved her and recognized that she was in grave danger. She was such a bright light in this dark, scary world, and that's why she grew the following that she did. It wasn't because of the sales or work or the people that were attracted to the beautiful person that she was. Her family has shared many times on social media how missed she is and the hole that exists in their lives now without her. It's such a tragedy that she's no longer here, and as always, I'm sending her family so much love and healing, and I pray that Alexis is resting peacefully. Thank you so much for spending time listening to Alexis' story today, and for, of course, spending time with me. Today's case haunts me, and my heart truly breaks for her. Knowing that she had the courage to at least start taking the steps to get out of this violent relationship, but her life was taken before she could, is truly sickening. Please know that love should never hurt, and I cannot stress this enough in these videos. You're never alone, even if it feels that way sometimes. Please make sure to take extra care of your mental health this week and do something that makes you smile. Nurse's orders. Oh, and don't forget to drop me a butterfly in the chat if you made it this far into today's video. I'll see you next time.